a girl sold for flour, a rancher haunted by death, one brutal summer that changed everything. In 1884, 18-year-old Evelyn Hart was thrown to the floor of a general store and auctioned off by her own father like livestock. The town watched. No one moved. Until a dangerous man named Silas Boone walked through those doors and shattered everything. This is their story, raw, violent, and unforgettable. If you stay until the end, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The heat in Dry Creek that summer could kill a man if he wasn't careful. It pressed down on the dirt streets like a weight, made the wooden buildings creak and groan, turned tempers short and throats dry. By mid-afternoon on that particular Saturday in July 1884, the general store was packed with ranchers restocking supplies, families buying fabric and flour, merchants arguing over prices. The air smelled like leather, tobacco, sweat, and the faint sweetness of hard candy in glass jars. Nobody expected what was about to happen. Evelyn Hart had been dreading this day for weeks. She'd seen the signs. Her father's drinking getting worse, the cupboards emptying out, the way he looked at her sometimes like she was inventory instead of his daughter. That morning, he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise and told her to put on her cleanest dress. "We're going to town," Caleb Hart had said, his breath already reeking of cheap whiskey even though it wasn't yet noon. "What for?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew better than to expect a real answer. "Business," he'd muttered, and that was all. She was 18 years old. Her mother, frail, exhausted, broken by years of living with Caleb's violence, had been bedridden for months. They had no money, no food. The small shack they called home was falling apart. Evelyn had been doing everything she could just to keep them alive, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. When they arrived at the general store, her father's grip on her wrist was iron tight. He dragged her through the doors so hard she stumbled. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The store went quiet in that uncomfortable way that meant people knew something bad was coming. "Afternoon, folks," Caleb announced loudly, his voice slurred but steady enough. He yanked Evelyn forward into the center of the room like she was a mule he was trying to sell. "Got a proposition for anyone interested." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Pa, don't," she started, but he backhanded her across the face so fast she didn't see it coming. The crack echoed through the store. She hit the wooden floor hard, tasting blood. "Shut your mouth, girl," Caleb snarled. Then he looked around at the crowd with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "My daughter here's strong, good worker. Cooks, cleans, don't complain much. I'm willing to trade her. Fair terms." The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn stayed on the floor, her cheek burning, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She could feel every eye in that room on her. Some people looked away immediately, ashamed. Others stared, frozen in shock or morbid curiosity. A few men exchanged glances, calculating. "Trade her for what, Caleb?" someone finally asked. It was Mr. Brennan, the owner of the feed store, his voice careful and cold. "Flour? Whiskey money? Medicine for the wife?" Caleb shrugged like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Hell, I'll take whatever's fair. She eats too much anyway." A woman gasped. Another covered her mouth, but nobody moved. Nobody stepped forward to stop it. Evelyn wanted to scream. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't work, and her father's shadow loomed over her like a threat she'd lived with her entire life. This was the man who'd beaten her mother into silence, who'd drunk away every dollar they ever had, who'd told Evelyn more times than she could count that she was worthless except for the work she could do. And now he was selling her, in front of the whole town. "This ain't right, Caleb," someone muttered from the back of the store. "Ain't illegal neither," Caleb shot back. "She's my daughter, my responsibility. If I say she's for trade, she's for trade." Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought about her mother back home, too weak to even sit up anymore. She thought about all the times she'd imagined running away, escaping, finding some kind of life that didn't involve fear and hunger and bruises. But there was nowhere to go. No money. No family who'd take her in. She was trapped. And then the doors slammed open. The sound was so loud it made half the people in the store jump. Evelyn looked up, and through her tears she saw him. A man she'd never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty coat and a hat pulled low over his face. He moved like violence, all controlled power and cold purpose. The entire room seemed to shift. "What the hell's going on in here?" the man asked, his voice low and rough. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to command attention. "None of your business, stranger," Caleb said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his tone now. The man stepped further into the store, and that's when Evelyn saw his face. Hard lines, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, eyes like frozen river water. He looked at Caleb, then at Evelyn on the floor, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, something colder. Rage. "You're selling your daughter," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Like I said, none of your damn business." Caleb's hand twitched toward the knife at his belt. "Move along." The stranger didn't move. Instead, he looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person who'd been standing there watching. His gaze was sharp enough to cut. "All of you," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the silence. "You're just going to stand here and let this happen?" No one answered. Shame hung in the air, thick as the heat. The man turned back to Caleb. "I know who you are. Caleb Hart, drunk, wife beater, piece of shit." He took a step closer. "And I know what you're doing here. So I'm going to give you one chance to walk out of this store and go home before I break every bone in your worthless body." Caleb laughed, but it sounded forced. Big talk from a stranger. "You know who I am, but I don't know you." Named Silas Boone. The reaction was immediate. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Evelyn had heard that name before. Everyone had. Silas Boone was a rancher from the northern hills, a man with a reputation for being harder than the land he worked and more dangerous than the wolves that prowled his property. People said he'd killed men during disputes over cattle and water rights. People said a lot of things. Caleb's face went pale. "You're the one who shot the McCready boys," Caleb said slowly. "They tried to steal my livestock," Silas replied, his tone flat. "I defended my property. Now you're going to walk out of here, or I'm going to defend this girl the same way." For a moment, Evelyn thought her father might actually back down. But Caleb Hart had never been smart, especially when he was drunk. Instead of leaving, he reached down and grabbed Evelyn by the hair, yanking her head back so hard she cried out. "She's mine," Caleb hissed. "My daughter. My right to do what I want with her." Silas moved. Evelyn barely saw it happen. 1 second her father was holding her, the next he was on the ground. Silas's boot on his chest, and Silas's hand wrapped around Caleb's wrist, so tight Evelyn could hear the bones grinding together. "Touch her again," Silas said, his voice quiet and terrible, "and I'll kill you right here in front of everyone." Caleb tried to fight back, tried to swing his free hand at Silas, but it was useless. Silas was stronger, faster, and completely in control. He twisted Caleb's arm until the older man screamed, then shoved him away like trash. "Get out," Silas said. Caleb scrambled to his feet, clutching his wrist, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You can't. She's my—" "She's a person," Silas interrupted, "not property. Now get out before I change my mind about letting you walk." For a long, tense moment, Caleb stood there, breathing hard, his eyes darting between Silas and Evelyn and the crowd that was watching his complete humiliation. Then finally, he spat on the floor and stumbled toward the door. "This ain't over," he muttered as he left. The door slammed behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn sat on the floor, shaking, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Silas Boone turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something other than rage in his eyes. Something that might have been pity, or maybe just exhaustion. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, even though it was a lie. Everything hurt. Silas held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Evelyn took it, and he pulled her to her feet. His grip was rough, calloused, but surprisingly gentle. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evelyn," she whispered. "Evelyn." He nodded once. "You got anywhere to go?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell him she had family, friends, options. But the truth stuck in her throat like glass. "No," she admitted. Silas was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on a decision he didn't want to make. Finally, he sighed. "I got a ranch about 10 miles north of here," he said. "It's not much, and it's not easy, but I need help, and you need a place to stay. I'm not buying you. I'm not trading for you. I'm offering you work and a roof. You can say no. That's your choice." Evelyn stared at him, her heart pounding. A choice. When was the last time anyone had given her a choice about anything? If I say yes, she said slowly, what happens if I want to leave? Then you leave, Silas said simply. I'm not your father. I'm not going to chain you to anything. She looked around the store. All those faces that had watched her father try to sell her. All those people who'd done nothing. Then she looked back at Silas Boone, a stranger, a man with a violent reputation, someone she had no reason to trust. But he'd stopped her father. He'd given her a choice. That was more than anyone else had ever done. I'll go with you, Evelyn said. Silas nodded. Get whatever you need from home. I'll wait outside. An hour later, Evelyn was sitting on the back of Silas's wagon, her few belongings wrapped in a threadbare blanket beside her. Her mother had been too weak to argue when Evelyn explained what was happening, had just squeezed her daughter's hand with what little strength she had left and whispered, Go. Live. He'd been there. He was probably drinking away his rage at the saloon. Evelyn didn't say goodbye to him. There was nothing to say. As the wagon rolled out of town, she watched Dry Creek disappear behind them, the buildings getting smaller and smaller until they were just shapes against the horizon. She should have felt relieved, free, but all she felt was numb. You're quiet, Silas observed from the driver's seat. Don't know what to say, Evelyn admitted. Don't have to say anything. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting everything gold and amber. Why'd you do it? Evelyn asked eventually. Why'd you help me? Silas didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I got kids, he said. 3 of them. And if someone ever tried to do to one of my children what your father tried to do to you, I'd want someone to stop it. You're married? Widower, Silas said shortly, in a tone that made it clear he didn't want to talk about it. Evelyn fell silent again. She had so many questions, but she was too tired to ask them, too tired to do anything but sit there and let the wagon carry her toward whatever came next. She didn't notice the riders following them until Silas suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop. Get down, he said quietly. What? Now? The urgency in his voice cut through her confusion. Evelyn scrambled off the wagon and crouched behind it just as she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Silas pulled a rifle from beneath the driver's seat and stood up, the weapon held loose but ready. 3 men on horseback appeared over the ridge. Even from a distance, Evelyn recognized the one in front, her father. Thought you might try something like this, Boone, Caleb shouted as they rode closer. He had a shotgun across his lap. The men with him, 2 drifters Evelyn vaguely recognized from the saloon, looked drunk and eager for trouble. Silas didn't lower his rifle. Turn around, Caleb. This is done. The hell it is. Caleb's face was flushed red with anger and alcohol. That's my daughter. You got no right to take her. She came with me by choice, Silas said evenly. You don't own her. Like hell I don't. Caleb raised his shotgun. I'll shoot you dead and take her back. You can try, Silas replied, his voice cold as winter. But you're drunk, you're stupid, and you can't shoot worth a damn. I'll put a bullet through your skull before you even get that barrel pointed at me. One of the drifters shifted nervously on his horse. Caleb, maybe we should... Shut up, Caleb snapped. Then to Silas, I ain't leaving without her. Yeah, you are. The standoff stretched out, tense and deadly. Evelyn's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She could see her father's finger on the trigger of his shotgun, could see the rage in his eyes. He was going to shoot. She knew it, but Silas was faster. In one smooth motion, he raised his rifle and fired a shot that kicked up dirt right in front of Caleb's horse. The animal reared, screaming, and Caleb nearly fell off. The drifters' horses bolted sideways in panic. Before anyone could recover, Silas had already levered another round into the chamber. Next one goes through your chest, Silas said calmly. Your choice. Caleb fought to control his horse, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might actually be stupid enough to try again. But the drifters were already backing their horses away, clearly wanting no part of a gunfight with Silas Boone. This ain't over, Caleb snarled, the same threat he'd made in the general store. She's mine. I'll get her back. Come near my property again and I'll bear you on it, Silas replied. Caleb spat, jerked his horse around and rode off, the drifters following. Evelyn watched them go, her whole body shaking. Silas lowered his rifle but didn't put it away. "He'll be back," Evelyn said quietly. "Probably," Silas agreed. "Men like him don't know when to quit." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring you trouble." Silas glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't bring me anything I can't handle. Come on, we need to get to the ranch before dark." They rode the rest of the way in tense silence. True to Caleb's threat, Evelyn spotted movement in the distance several times, riders shadowing them, staying just far enough away to avoid another confrontation, but close enough to be a threat. Her father wasn't giving up. By the time they reached Silas's ranch, the sun had set completely, leaving only the pale light of a half-moon to see by. The ranch house was bigger than Evelyn had expected. 2 stories, solid wood construction, a wide porch. But even in the darkness, she could see it was in rough shape. Fences needed mending. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds had taken over what might have once been a garden. "It's not much," Silas said as he helped her down from the wagon. "And it's going to be a lot of work. You sure you want to do this?" Evelyn looked back toward the road they'd come from, thinking about her father out there somewhere in the dark, probably already planning his next move. Then she looked at the house. Run down, but solid. A place that could maybe, possibly, be something like a home. "I'm sure," she said. Silas nodded. "All right then. Let's get you inside. Kids are probably asleep, but you'll meet them in the morning." He grabbed her bag and started toward the house, but Evelyn stayed where she was for a moment, looking out into the darkness. She could feel eyes watching her, could feel the weight of her father's rage like a physical thing. "He's still out there, isn't he?" she asked quietly. Silas paused on the porch steps and followed her gaze. "Yeah, he is." "What are we going to do? Tonight?" Silas shifted the rifle in his hands. "I'm going to stand guard. Make sure he knows I meant what I said about my property." "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do." Silas's voice was flat, final. "Get inside, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was her problem, and he shouldn't have to spend the night in the freezing dark because of her. But the look on his face stopped her. This was a man who kept his word, and he'd given his word to protect her. "Thank you," she said. Silas just nodded and turned away, already scanning the darkness for threats. Evelyn went inside. The house was quiet, dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace. She could hear soft breathing from upstairs. The children, sleeping. She didn't explore, didn't light a lamp, just sat down in a chair by the window where she could see Silas's silhouette on the porch, his rifle across his knees, watching the night. Hours passed. Evelyn dozed fitfully, jolting awake at every sound. Around midnight, she saw movement near the fence line, figures on horseback, just visible in the moonlight. Her father and his hired thugs, testing Silas's resolve. Silas stood up, raised his rifle, and fired a warning shot into the air. The riders scattered. Evelyn pressed her hand against the cold glass of the window, her breath fogging it up. Out there in the dark, Silas Boone, a stranger who owed her nothing, was risking his life because he'd promised her safety. She didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to make sense of a world where someone would actually keep their word to her. But as the night wore on and Silas remained standing guard, never wavering, never coming inside, Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. Something that might have been hope, or maybe just the fragile beginning of trust. She'd left her old life behind tonight, and there was no going back. When dawn finally broke, cold and gray, Silas was still on that porch, still watching. Evelyn got up from the chair, her body stiff and aching, and opened the door. "You should sleep," she said. Silas turned to look at her. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were still sharp. "Later," he said. "Right now, I need to make sure the fence is secure. And you need to meet the kids before they wake up and find a stranger in their house." He said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like he hadn't just spent the entire night standing guard against armed men. Like this was just another day on the ranch. Maybe for him, it was. Evelyn followed him inside, and for the first time since her father had dragged her into that general store, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. Even if leaving her old life behind meant fighting to keep this new one. Even if it meant her father would never stop trying to drag her back. Even if it meant everything was about to get worse before it got better. She'd made her choice. and she was going to live with it. The children were already awake when Evelyn stepped into the kitchen that first morning. 3 pairs of eyes stared at her from the table, wary, confused, and in the case of the smallest one, openly hostile. "Who are you?" the oldest boy asked. He looked about 12, all sharp angles and suspicion, his dark hair sticking up in the back like he'd slept on it wrong. "This is Evelyn," Silas said from behind her, his voice rough with exhaustion. "She's going to be helping around the ranch for a while." "We don't need help," the boy said immediately. "Wyatt," Silas's tone carried a warning, "mind your manners." Wyatt's jaw clenched, but he looked down at his plate without saying anything else. The middle child, a boy who looked maybe 8 or 9, watched Evelyn with wide, solemn eyes, but didn't speak. The little girl, probably no more than 5, clutched a rag doll and glared. "I'm Evelyn Hart," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "I know this is strange, having someone new here, but I promise I'm not trying to—" "Our mama's dead," the little girl announced loudly. "You can't be our new mama." The silence that followed was crushing. Silas closed his eyes briefly like he'd been hit. Wyatt's knuckles went white around his fork. The middle boy just stared at his plate, his breathing suddenly too fast. "Lila," Silas said quietly, "that's enough." "But you said—" "I said that's enough." The little girl's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry, just buried her face in her doll's ratty hair and went silent. Evelyn's heart twisted. She'd known Silas was a widower, but seeing the raw grief still hanging over this family was something else entirely. This wasn't just a house that needed fixing. These were people who were broken, and no amount of mending fences or cooking meals was going to fix that. "I'm not here to replace anyone," Evelyn said softly, looking directly at Lila. "I'm just here to help your pa with chores. That's all." Lila didn't respond, but her grip on the doll loosened slightly. Wyatt pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I got work to do," he muttered, and left before Silas could say anything. The middle boy, Noah, Evelyn would learn later, followed his brother without a word. Just like that, breakfast was over. Silas rubbed his face with both hands, looking older than he had the night before. "That went well," he said dryly. "They're grieving," Evelyn said. "They're angry." Silas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "At me, mostly. They think I should have saved her." "How long ago did she—" "6 months." He said it flat, like he'd practiced keeping the emotion out of it. "Childbirth. The baby didn't make it either." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. There were no words that would make it better, so she didn't try. "I should check the fence line," Silas said, already moving toward the door. "Make sure your father didn't come back during the night. There's food in the pantry if you're hungry. Make yourself at home." Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in a kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee and grief. She stood there for a moment, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere upstairs she could hear Lila crying quietly. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. The first week nearly broke her. The ranch was in worse shape than it had looked in the dark. Fences were falling apart. The chicken coop had a hole in the roof. The vegetable garden had gone completely to seed. Inside the house, dust covered every surface, dishes were piled in the sink, and the laundry situation was beyond salvageable. Evelyn threw herself into the work because it was easier than thinking. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled. She hauled water from the well until her shoulders screamed. She cooked meals that the children barely touched, cleaned rooms that would just get dirty again, mended clothes that were more whole than fabric. And through it all, Silas worked from dawn until long past dark, barely speaking to anyone, barely sleeping, driving himself like a man trying to outrun something he couldn't escape. The children avoided her, Wyatt especially. He'd look at her sometimes with such naked resentment that Evelyn felt it like a slap. She understood. Of course she understood. Their mother had died, their father had retreated into work and grief, and now some stranger was in their house trying to do their mother's job. They didn't want her here. They wanted their mother back. And there was nothing Evelyn could do about that. On the 4th night, she was washing dishes when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Noah standing in the doorway, watching her with those big, solemn eyes. "Can I help you with something?" Evelyn asked. Noah shook his head, but he didn't leave, just stood there, staring. Are you hungry? I saved some stew from dinner. Another headshake. Evelyn dried her hands on her apron, trying to figure out what the boy wanted. Do you want to talk about something? For a long moment, Noah just looked at her. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, he said, Do you know any stories? Evelyn blinked. Stories? Mama used to tell us stories before bed. Wyatt says we're too old for that now, but he trailed off, looking at his feet. But you miss them, Evelyn finished gently. Noah nodded. Something in Evelyn's chest cracked open. This child, this sweet, silent child, wasn't asking for much, just a small piece of what he'd lost. I know a few stories, she said. Not as good as your mama's, probably, but if you want to hear one. For the first time since she'd arrived, Noah smiled. It was small and tentative, but it was real. Okay, he said. That night, Evelyn sat on the edge of Noah's bed and told him a story her own mother had told her once about a brave knight and a dragon made of winter itself. Noah listened with his eyes wide, barely breathing, soaking up every word. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Will you tell me another one tomorrow? If you want me to, Evelyn said. I want you to. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The trouble with Wyatt came to a head a week later. Evelyn had been trying to fix the chicken coop when she heard shouting from the barn. She dropped her hammer and ran, her heart in her throat, half expecting to find her father and his thugs had come back. Instead, she found Silas and Wyatt facing each other in the barn, both of them rigid with anger. Not your decision to make, Silas was saying, his voice tight. You brought her here without asking us, Wyatt shot back. You just showed up with some stranger and expected us to be okay with it. I don't need to ask your permission to run my own house. This was Mama's house, too. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Silas's expression went completely blank, which was somehow worse than anger. Wyatt looked like he immediately regretted saying it, but he didn't take it back. Just stood there, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. Your mama's dead, Silas said quietly, and this ranch is falling apart. I needed help. Evelyn needed a place to stay. That's all there is to it. You could have hired someone from town. And who in town needs the work bad enough to live out here? Who'd take a job on a ranch where the owner's kids won't even speak to them? Silas shook his head. Evelyn's staying, Wyatt. You don't have to like it, but you do have to be civil. She's trying to replace Mama. No, she's not. Then why is she telling Noah bedtime stories? Why is she cooking Mama's recipes? Why is she doing the things that need to be done? Silas interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. Because someone has to, and it sure as hell isn't you. Wyatt flinched like he'd been struck. Evelyn wanted to disappear, wanted to melt into the shadows and pretend she hadn't heard any of this. But it was too late. Wyatt had already seen her standing there, and the look on his face was pure betrayal. This is her fault, Wyatt said, pointing at Evelyn. Everything was fine before she came here. Everything was not fine, Silas said, but Wyatt was already storming past Evelyn, his shoulder slamming into hers hard enough to make her stumble. She watched him go, her stomach churning with guilt and helplessness. Don't take it personal, Silas said after a moment. He's just angry, Evelyn finished. I know. He blames himself for his mother dying. Thinks if he'd ridden to town faster to get the doctor, she might have survived. Silas's voice was rough. I've told him 100 times it wasn't his fault, but he doesn't believe me. And now I'm here, making it worse. You're not making anything worse. You're just... Silas trailed off, looking tired. You're here. And that's enough to remind him of what's missing. Evelyn nodded, even though nothing about this felt okay. She'd come here looking for safety, for a chance to escape her father's violence. She hadn't expected to walk into a family still bleeding from their own wounds. I can leave, she offered quietly, if it would make things easier. Silas looked at her sharply. Where would you go? I don't know, somewhere. Back to your father? No, never that. Then you're staying. Silas picked up the pitchfork he'd dropped and went back to work. Wyatt will come around eventually, or he won't. Either way, you're not leaving just because a 12-year-old boy is angry at the world. But Evelyn wasn't so sure. That night, lying awake in the small room Silas had given her, she could hear Wyatt pacing in his room above hers. Back and forth, like a caged animal. She'd thought leaving her father would mean leaving violence and anger behind. Instead, she'd just traded one kind of pain for another. The first snow came in late September, weeks earlier than anyone expected. Evelyn woke up to find the world transformed, white and silent and deadly cold. "This isn't good," Silas said at breakfast, his face grim as he stared out the window. "The cattle aren't ready for this. We need to get them down from the high pasture before the real storms hit." "How long do we have?" Evelyn asked. "Not long enough." He was already pulling on his heavy coat. "Wyatt, you're coming with me. Noah, you stay here and keep the fires going. Lila, help Evelyn with—" "I want to come," Lila interrupted. "No." "But—" "I said no." Silas's tone left no room for argument. He looked at Evelyn. "We might be gone overnight if the weather turns. Don't wait dinner for us." Then he and Wyatt were gone, swallowed up by the white. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn kept busy with chores, but her mind kept drifting to Silas and Wyatt out there in the cold. By evening, the temperature had dropped so low that ice was forming on the inside of the windows. "When will Pa come back?" Lila asked for the 10th time. "Soon," Evelyn said, hoping it was true. But night fell, and they didn't come back. The wind picked up, howling around the house like something alive and angry. Snow piled against the windows. The temperature kept dropping. Evelyn made dinner, but none of them could eat. Noah sat by the window, his face pressed to the glass, trying to see through the storm. Lila cried herself to sleep on the couch. By midnight, Evelyn was pacing. This wasn't right. Even accounting for bad weather, they should have been back by now. Something had gone wrong. She made a decision. "Noah," she said quietly, "I need you to watch Lila." Noah looked up at her, his eyes wide with understanding and fear. "You're going after them." "I have to." "Pa said to stay here." "I know what he said." Evelyn was already pulling on every piece of warm clothing she could find. "But they're in trouble. I can feel it. You'll die out there." "Maybe." She looked at the boy, 9 years old and already carrying the weight of the world. "But I can't just sit here and do nothing. Can you understand that?" Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "If I'm not back by morning," Evelyn said, "you ride to town and get help. Can you do that?" Another nod. Evelyn squeezed his shoulder, then stepped out into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Within seconds, her face was numb, her eyes watering so badly she could barely see. The wind screamed in her ears, drowning out everything else. She'd never been to the high pasture, but she'd heard Silas mention it was northeast of the ranch house, up near the tree line. She pointed herself in that direction and started walking, leading one of the horses behind her. It was slow going. The snow was already knee-deep in places, and every step forward felt like wading through quicksand. The wind kept trying to push her off course. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, couldn't feel her feet. But she kept going. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only the next step, and the next, and the next. She was starting to think she'd made a terrible mistake, that she was going to die out here and leave those children completely alone, when she saw it. Light. Flickering and faint, but unmistakable. Fire. Evelyn forced her frozen legs to move faster, following the light until she saw the shelter, a crude lean-to made of broken wagon boards, half buried in snow. And beside it, 2 figures huddled near a fire that was barely more than embers. "Silas!" She half fell, half stumbled into the shelter. "Wyatt!" Silas's head jerked up, his eyes widening in shock. "Evelyn? What the hell are you hurt?" "My leg." His voice was tight with pain. "Horse slipped on ice, threw me into a ravine. Wyatt pulled me out, but I can't walk." Evelyn could see the way he was favoring his left leg, the blood staining his pants. Wyatt sat beside him, shivering so hard his teeth were chattering, his lips blue with cold. "We have to get you back to the house," Evelyn said. "Can't," Silas said. "Storm's too bad. We'd freeze before we made it halfway. Then we stay here and keep the fire going. There's no more wood." Evelyn looked around the shelter, her mind racing. He was right. They'd used everything they had. The fire was dying, and once it went out, they'd die too. She thought about the wagon, the broken boards Wyatt had used to build this shelter. There had to be more. Stay here, she ordered, and crawled back out into the storm. The wagon was 30 feet away, on its side in the snow. Evelyn tore into it with her bare hands, ripping off boards, pulling apart anything that would burn. The wood was half frozen, but it would have to do. She dragged it back to the shelter piece by piece, her muscles screaming in protest. By the time she had enough for a real fire, she couldn't feel most of her body. But she'd done it. Silas watched her with an expression she couldn't read as she fed the wood into the fire, coaxing it back to life. Slowly, blessedly, warmth began to spread through the shelter. "You're insane," he said finally. "Probably," Evelyn agreed, her voice shaking. "You could have died. So could you." Wyatt looked between them, something shifting in his face. For the first time since she'd arrived, he didn't look at her with resentment. He looked at her like she was a person. "Thank you," the boy said quietly. Evelyn met his eyes. "You're welcome." They huddled together through the night, keeping the fire alive, taking turns staying awake to feed it more wood. Evelyn could hear wolves howling somewhere in the distance, their voices rising and falling with the wind. "They can smell blood," Silas muttered, his hand on his injured leg. "They can't get through the fire," Evelyn said with more confidence than she felt. But she was wrong. Around 3 in the morning, she saw the first pair of eyes in the darkness beyond the firelight. Then another pair. And another. The wolves had found them. Silas tried to stand, grimacing in pain, but his leg wouldn't hold him. Wyatt grabbed a burning branch from the fire, holding it out like a weapon. "Stay back!" the boy shouted, his voice cracking. The wolves circled closer, their eyes reflecting the firelight, their breath steaming in the frozen air. Evelyn grabbed another burning branch and stood beside Wyatt. "Get behind us," she told Silas. "Like hell. Get behind us," she repeated, her voice hard. "You can't fight with that leg." For once, Silas didn't argue. The wolves tested them, darting in and out, looking for weakness. Each time one got too close, Evelyn or Wyatt would thrust the burning wood at it, driving it back. But they were getting bolder, and there were too many of them. One wolf, bigger than the others, with gray fur and scars across its face, lunged directly at Wyatt. The boy swung his branch, but the wolf was faster. Its jaws closed around the wood, ripping it from Wyatt's hands. Evelyn moved without thinking. She threw herself between the wolf and Wyatt, swinging her own branch so hard the burning end caught the wolf across the face. It yelped and retreated, and the rest of the pack fell back with it. But they didn't leave, just circled, waiting. "We can't keep this up all night," Wyatt said, his voice shaking. "We don't have a choice," Evelyn replied. They stood guard until dawn, taking turns when one of them got too tired to hold the branch steady anymore. When the sun finally rose, pale and cold through the dissipating storm, the wolves melted away into the trees. Evelyn's arms felt like lead. Her eyes burned from smoke and exhaustion, but they were alive. "We need to move now," Silas said, his voice rough. "While we can." Getting him onto the horse was agony. He tried to hide it, but Evelyn could see the pain written across his face. Wyatt looked exhausted, moving like a sleepwalker. The journey back to the ranch took twice as long as it should have. By the time they finally saw the house, Evelyn was half carrying Wyatt, and Silas was barely conscious. Noah must have been watching, because the door flew open before they even reached the porch. "Pa!" he shouted, and Lila appeared behind him, her face crumpling with relief. They got Silas inside and onto his bed. His leg was badly injured, not broken, but torn up enough that he wouldn't be walking on it for weeks. Evelyn cleaned and bandaged it as best she could, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. "You saved our lives," Silas said quietly while she worked. "You saved mine first," Evelyn replied. That afternoon, after Silas had finally fallen asleep and the children were warming themselves by the fire, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn opened it to find half a dozen people from town standing on the porch, bundled against the cold. Mr. Brennan from the feed store, Mrs. Yates from the general store. Others she recognized but didn't know by name. "We heard what happened," Mr. Brennan said. "Heard you rode into the Widowmaker storm alone and brought Silas and his boy back alive." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. "We also heard," Mrs. Yates added, her voice softer, "that you've been working yourself half to death trying to keep this ranch running. We thought you might need some help." They'd brought food, firewood, medicine. One of them even brought lumber to fix the fence. Evelyn stood there, overwhelmed, as these people, the same people who'd watched her father try to sell her in the general store, unpacked their wagons and started making repairs without being asked. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. Mrs. Yates smiled. "Because you're one of us now, and we take care of our own." But not everyone in town felt that way. That night, after the visitors had gone and the house was quiet again, Evelyn heard voices outside. She went to the window and saw 3 riders near the fence line, her father, and 2 men she didn't recognize. They didn't approach the house, just sat there on their horses, watching. Evelyn's blood ran cold. He hadn't given up. He'd been waiting. And now, with Silas injured and unable to defend the ranch, her father was going to make his move. She didn't sleep that night, just sat by the window, watching those riders watch the house, and wondered how much longer she had before everything came crashing down. The riders stayed until dawn, then vanished like smoke. But Evelyn knew they'd be back. Men like her father didn't give up. They just waited for the right moment to strike. Silas was confined to bed for 2 weeks, his leg healing slower than any of them wanted. He hated it, hated being useless while the ranch work piled up. Evelyn could hear him cursing from his room whenever he tried to put weight on it and failed. "You need to rest," she told him for the 100th time, bringing him coffee that had gone cold because she'd gotten distracted fixing a broken window latch. "I need to work," Silas growled, his frustration barely contained. "Winter's coming hard, and we're not ready." "We'll manage." "How? You can't do everything yourself." "I'm not by myself." Evelyn nodded toward the window, where Wyatt was chopping wood in the yard. The boy had been different since the storm, quieter, but not in the sullen way he'd been before. More like he was thinking about things he hadn't wanted to think about. "Wyatt's been helping." Silas followed her gaze, something complicated crossing his face. "He tell you what he said to me? After you saved us?" "No." "Said his mama would have liked you." Silas's voice went rough. "Said maybe it was okay that you were here." Evelyn's throat tightened. "That's something. It's more than something." Silas looked at her directly, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not gratitude exactly, something deeper. "You could have died out there. You knew that, and you came anyway. What else was I supposed to do? Most people would have stayed inside where it was safe." "I'm not most people." "No," Silas said quietly. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Noah's voice rang out from downstairs, breaking the spell. "Evelyn, someone's here!" Evelyn's first thought was her father, and her hand went instinctively to the kitchen knife she'd started keeping in her apron pocket. But when she got to the door, it was Deputy Marshal Tom Hendricks standing on the porch, hat in his hands, his face grim. "Miss Hart," he said, "I need to speak with you." Her stomach dropped. "What happened?" "It's your mother. I'm sorry to tell you this, but she passed 3 days ago." The world tilted sideways. Evelyn grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, her mind refusing to process the words. Her mother, dead. "How?" she managed to ask. "Doctor said it was her heart. She went peaceful, if that's any comfort." Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. "There's going to be a burial tomorrow at the town cemetery. Thought you'd want to know." Evelyn nodded numbly. "Thank you for telling me." After Hendricks left, she stood on the porch for a long time, staring at nothing. She'd known her mother was sick, had known it was only a matter of time, but knowing something and feeling it were different things entirely. "Evelyn?" Wyatt's voice, uncertain. "You okay?" She wasn't, but she turned around and forced something like a smile anyway. "I'm fine, just need a minute." She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. Her mother had been weak, broken by years of abuse, barely able to get out of bed by the end. But she'd been the only person who'd ever shown Evelyn kindness, the only person who'd tried to protect her, even when she didn't have the strength to protect herself. And now she was gone. That night, Evelyn told Silas she needed to go to town for the funeral. "I'll come with you," he said immediately. "You can't even walk." "Then Wyatt will take you." "Silas?" "Your father's going to be there." His voice was flat, certain. "And he's going to cause trouble. You're not going alone." Evelyn wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Caleb Hart wouldn't miss a chance to make a scene, especially not at his wife's funeral. So the next morning, she rode into Dry Creek with Wyatt beside her, both of them tense and watchful. The cemetery was on the edge of town, a small plot of land surrounded by a crooked iron fence. Maybe 20 people had gathered, which was more than Evelyn expected. Her mother hadn't had many friends. Caleb had made sure of that. The coffin was already in the ground, waiting to be covered. Evelyn stood at the edge of the grave, staring down at the plain wooden box, trying to feel something other than numb. "I'm sorry about your ma," Mrs. Yates said quietly, appearing beside her. "She was a good woman, didn't deserve the hand she was dealt." "No," Evelyn agreed, "she didn't." Other people offered condolences. Some of them looked genuinely sad. Others just looked uncomfortable, like they didn't know what to say to the girl who'd been traded for flour and was now living with Silas Boone. The preacher started talking, his voice droning on about dust and ashes and eternal rest. Evelyn barely heard him. She was too busy watching the crowd, waiting for her father to show up. He didn't keep her waiting long. Caleb Hart appeared halfway through the service, stumbling through the cemetery gate with a bottle in one hand and rage written across his face. He was drunker than Evelyn had ever seen him, his clothes filthy, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The preacher stopped talking. Everyone turned to stare. "That's right," Caleb slurred, pointing at the crowd. "All of you, looking at me like I'm the monster." He laughed, harsh and bitter. "But you're the ones who let her die alone." "Caleb," the preacher said carefully, "this isn't the time." "The hell it isn't!" Caleb swayed on his feet, taking a long pull from his bottle. "My wife's in that hole because of her." He pointed at Evelyn with the bottle, whiskey sloshing over the rim. "She abandoned us, left her own mother to rot so she could play house with Silas Boone." Evelyn's face burned. She could feel everyone looking at her, judging, wondering if there was truth in her father's words. "That's not what happened," Wyatt said, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Shut your mouth, boy," Caleb snarled. "This is family business." "You made it everyone's business when you tried to sell her in the general store," Wyatt shot back. And Evelyn's heart lurched. The kid was defending her, actually defending her. Caleb's face went purple with rage. "You little shit!" "Mr. Hart, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the preacher said, but Caleb wasn't listening. He was reaching for something in his coat. Evelyn saw it before anyone else did. The dull gleam of metal, the familiar shape of her father's old revolver. "You took everything from me," Caleb said, pointing the gun directly at Evelyn. His hand was shaking, but at this distance it didn't matter. Even drunk, he couldn't miss. "My daughter, my wife, my life." Women screamed, men shouted. Someone tried to grab Caleb from behind, but he wheeled around, the gun swinging wildly. "Everyone stay back," he roared. "I'll shoot anyone who moves." The crowd froze. Evelyn's mind was racing, but her body felt frozen. This was it. This was how it ended. Her father was going to kill her in front of everyone, right there at her mother's grave. Then Wyatt stepped between them. The 12-year-old boy moved before anyone could stop him, putting himself directly in the line of fire. His face was pale but determined, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "No," Wyatt said simply. Caleb stared at him, momentarily thrown. "Get out of the way, boy." "No." "I said move." "If you want to shoot her," Wyatt said, his voice shaking but steady, "you're going to have to shoot me first." Time seemed to stop. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at this child who was willing to die for her. "Wyatt, move," she whispered desperately. "No," he said again, not taking his eyes off Caleb. Caleb's face twisted with confusion and rage. "You don't even know her. Why the hell would you—" "Because she saved my pa's life," Wyatt interrupted. "And my life. And because she's a better person than you'll ever be." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. His hand wavered. And that's when Silas appeared. Evelyn didn't know how he'd gotten there. He couldn't even walk properly. But suddenly he was there, moving faster than should have been possible with his injured leg. He slammed into Caleb from the side, driving the older man into the muddy ground. The revolver fired. The shot went wild, the bullet punching into the sky. Horses bolted in terror, their screams mixing with the shouts of the crowd. Women grabbed their children and ran. Men rushed forward. Silas and Caleb rolled across the cemetery ground, fighting like animals. Caleb was bigger, but Silas was sober and fighting with the focused precision of someone who'd done this before. He drove his fist into Caleb's face once, twice, 3 times, until blood poured from the older man's nose and mouth. "Silas, stop!" someone shouted. "You'll kill him!" But Silas wasn't listening. He grabbed Caleb by the collar and hauled him up, his face twisted with fury. "You ever," Silas said, his voice deadly quiet, "point a gun at her again, and I will put you in the ground next to your wife. Do you understand me?" Caleb tried to spit at him, but only managed to dribble blood down his own chin. Deputy Hendricks finally pushed through the crowd, gun drawn. "That's enough! Both of you, back off!" Silas let go, and Caleb collapsed in the mud like a puppet with cut strings. He was crying now, ugly heaving sobs that shook his whole body. "She was all I had," Caleb wept, staring at his wife's coffin. "She was all I had, and she left me." "You drove her away," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his tears like a blade. Everyone turned to look at her. She walked forward slowly, stopping just out of reach of her father. "You beat her, starved her, made her life a living hell, and when she was dying, you were too drunk to even notice." "I loved her," Caleb insisted weakly. "You don't know what love is." Evelyn looked down at the broken man in the mud, the man who'd terrified her for 18 years, and felt nothing but cold contempt. "You tried to sell me for flour. You threatened to kill me at my own mother's funeral, and you want to talk about love? Evelyn? No." She crouched down so they were eye level. "You stopped being my father the moment you threw me on that floor. And you stopped being her husband long before that, so you can cry and drink yourself to death for all I care. But don't you dare act like you lost something you ever actually valued." The words destroyed him. Evelyn could see it happening in real time, the last shreds of dignity, of self-justification, of victimhood crumbling away. Caleb Hart curled into himself, sobbing into the mud, and nobody moved to help him. Deputy Hendricks cleared his throat. "I'm taking him in. Public drunkenness, assault with a deadly weapon, disturbing the peace. That should keep him locked up for a while." He hauled Caleb to his feet and dragged him away. The crowd watched in silence. Evelyn turned back to her mother's grave. The coffin was still there, waiting to be buried. Somehow, through everything, the funeral wasn't over. "Should we—" the preacher started uncertainly. "Finish it," Evelyn said. "Please." So they did. They filled in the grave while Evelyn stood there with Wyatt on one side and Silas on the other, his hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. When it was done and the last shovel of dirt had been patted down, most of the crowd quietly left. Mrs. Yates stayed. So did Mr. Brennan and a few others. "That took courage," Mrs. Yates said quietly. "What you said to him." Evelyn didn't feel courageous, she felt empty. It needed to be said. Your mother would have been proud of you. Evelyn wasn't sure about that. Her mother had spent her whole life being afraid of Caleb, afraid of leaving, afraid of everything. Evelyn didn't want to be like that. She'd rather be angry than afraid. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Silas was clearly in pain, though he tried to hide it. Wyatt kept glancing at Evelyn like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Finally, as they were almost home, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "For what?" "For being such a bastard to you when you first got here. For making everything harder." He stared at his hands. "You didn't deserve that." "You were grieving," Evelyn said gently. "You're allowed to be angry." "Not at you, though. You didn't do anything wrong." Wyatt swallowed hard. "And today, when your pa had that gun, I thought about my ma, about how she'd want someone to protect you the way she couldn't protect herself." Evelyn's eyes stung. She reached over and squeezed Wyatt's shoulder, and the boy didn't pull away. When they got back to the ranch, Noah and Lila were waiting on the porch, their faces anxious. "Is Pa okay?" Noah asked immediately. "I'm fine," Silas said, though he was limping badly. "Just need to rest." Lila ran to him anyway, wrapping her small arms around his legs. "You're bleeding." He was. His knuckles were split open from the fight, and there was a gash on his forehead that Evelyn hadn't noticed before. "Inside," Evelyn ordered. "All of you. I need to clean those wounds before they get infected." She spent the next hour patching everyone up. Silas's hands were a mess, and the cut on his head needed stitches she didn't know how to do properly. She did her best anyway, her hands steady even though her heart was still racing. "You shouldn't have come," she told him as she worked. "You could have torn your leg open again. Wasn't going to let you face him alone." "I had Wyatt." "Wyatt's 12. Silas winced as she pulled a stitch tight. "And your father had a gun, so you thought you'd get yourself killed instead." "Didn't plan on getting killed. Planned on stopping him." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "Which I did." Evelyn tied off the last stitch and sat back. "You're an idiot." "Probably. Definitely." She started cleaning up the medical supplies, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "But thank you for what you did." "Don't thank me for that," Silas said quietly. "Thank Wyatt. Kid's got more guts than men twice his age. He was right about that." Evelyn thought about Wyatt stepping between her and that gun, his young voice saying no, like it was the simplest thing in the world, like standing up to a violent drunk with a weapon was something 12-year-olds did every day. That night, she found Wyatt in the barn, mucking out stalls even though it was well past dark. "You should be in bed," she said. "Can't sleep." He kept working, not looking at her. "Keep thinking about what could have happened today." "But it didn't happen." "Only because Pa stopped him." Wyatt finally looked up, and his eyes were too old for his face. "What if Pa hadn't gotten there in time? What if—" "But he did," Evelyn interrupted gently. "And you were incredibly brave, standing up to my father like that." "Didn't feel brave, felt scared." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing anyway." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it, "My ma used to say that." Evelyn's heart twisted. She sounds like she was a smart woman. She was. Wyatt set down the pitchfork and wiped his hands on his pants. I think she would have liked you being here, even if I didn't want to at first." "You're allowed to have complicated feelings about it." "Are you?" "Allowed to have complicated feelings about being here, I mean." He looked at her with surprising insight. "This wasn't what you signed up for. Taking care of us, dealing with our mess." "No," Evelyn admitted, "but life rarely gives you what you sign up for. You just do your best with what you get." "Is that what you're doing? Your best?" "I'm trying." Wyatt nodded slowly. "That's all any of us can do, I guess." They finished the chores together in companionable silence, and when they went inside, Evelyn felt something had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly. That would take time. But understanding. Respect. It was a start. The weeks that followed were strange. Caleb was in jail, which should have brought relief, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Men like her father didn't just give up. They found ways to hurt you even from behind bars. She was right to worry. The trouble started with whispers. Evelyn would go to town for supplies and catch people staring, their conversation stopping abruptly when she walked by. The women were the worst, tight-lipped and judgmental, their eyes following her like she'd done something shameful. "What are they saying?" she finally asked Mrs. Yates, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "It's foolishness," Mrs. Yates said. "Don't pay it any mind." "What are they saying?" Evelyn repeated. Mrs. Yates sighed. "Some folks think, well, they think you trapped Silas, that you're taking advantage of a grieving widower." Evelyn's stomach turned. "That's ridiculous." "I know that. Anyone with eyes can see you're working yourself to death on that ranch. But people talk, especially when they don't understand something." Mrs. Yates lowered her voice. "And there's rumors your father's been spreading stories from jail, telling anyone who'll listen that Silas paid him for you, that you're nothing but a—" "I get the idea." Evelyn cut her off, her face burning. She left town early that day, her head held high but her heart heavy. It shouldn't matter what people thought. But it did. She'd spent her whole life being looked down on, and just when she thought she might finally escape it, the gossip was starting all over again. Silas noticed something was wrong the moment she got home. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing." "Don't lie to me." Evelyn set down the supplies harder than necessary. "People are talking, saying that we're—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. Silas's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. Easy for you to say, you're not the one they're calling names." They called my wife names too when I married her, Silas said quietly. Said she was marrying beneath her station, that I was too rough, too violent. Said our children would be raised like animals. He looked at her. People always find something to judge. You can't live your life worrying about it. I don't want to cause you trouble. You're not. He moved closer, his expression serious. Listen to me. I don't give a damn what anyone in this town thinks. You've earned your place here 10 times over. Anyone who says different can answer to me. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfold in Evelyn's chest. But it also scared her. She wasn't used to anyone defending her like this. Why do you care? She asked. Really? I'm nobody. You're not nobody. Silas said it with such certainty that Evelyn almost believed him. And I care because you matter. To the kids. To this ranch. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. To me. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Evelyn didn't know how to name. Then Noah called from upstairs, needing help with something, and the spell broke. But that conversation stayed with Evelyn. The way Silas had looked at her, the things he hadn't quite said, but that hung in the air between them anyway. She tried not to think about it too much. There was too much work to do, too much uncertainty hanging over them. Her father was still in jail, but his trial was coming up, and everyone knew he'd be out soon, and when he got out, he'd come for her. Evelyn just didn't know when. The answer came 3 weeks later on a cold October morning. Deputy Hendricks rode out to the ranch, his face grim. Your father's being released today, he told Evelyn. Judge gave him 30 days for the assault charge. Time served. That's it? Evelyn felt her blood run cold. He tried to kill me. I know, I argued for longer, but the judge... Hendricks shook his head. Point is, he'll be out by sundown. Thought you should know. After he left, Evelyn stood on the porch, staring out at the horizon. 30 days. Her father had gotten 30 days for pulling a gun on her at her mother's funeral. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. We'll handle it, Silas said from behind her. How? However we have to. But handling it turned out to be harder than either of them anticipated. Caleb didn't come directly to the ranch. Instead, he started spreading his poison through town, telling anyone who'd listen his version of events. How his ungrateful daughter had abandoned her dying mother. How Silas had stolen his property. How they were living in sin out there on that ranch. The rumors got worse. Nastier. Some people believed them. Others didn't, but they listened anyway because scandal was more interesting than truth. Then came the fall fair. Evelyn almost didn't go. She knew it would be uncomfortable, knew people would stare, but Silas insisted. You can't hide from them, he said. That's what they want. For you to feel ashamed and disappear. Maybe I should. Like hell. Silas's voice was hard. You're going to that fair, you're going to hold your head high. And you're going to show every one of those judgmental bastards that you don't care what they think. So Evelyn went. She even entered the baking competition, using her mother's biscuit recipe, the one thing her mother had been good at, the one piece of her childhood that hadn't been tainted by her father's violence. The fairgrounds were packed, families everywhere, children running and laughing, the smell of fried food and wood smoke heavy in the air. Evelyn dropped off her entry at the competition table and tried to blend into the crowd. It didn't work. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers. A group of women standing by the quilting display stopped talking when she walked by, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Then Mayor's wife, Constance Blackwood, appeared. Constance was everything Evelyn wasn't, perfectly dressed, perfectly coiffed, the kind of woman who'd never had to scrub her own floors or wonder where her next meal was coming from. She looked at Evelyn like she was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of her expensive shoe. Miss Hart, Constance said, her voice dripping with false politeness. How brave of you to show your face here. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. Mrs. Blackwood, I see you've entered the baking competition. How ambitious. Constance's smile was sharp. Though I must say, I'm surprised you have time for such things, what with all your duties at the Boone Ranch. The emphasis she put on duties made it clear what she was implying. I manage, Evelyn said evenly. I'm sure you do. Constance looked her up and down. You know, there's been quite a bit of talk about your arrangement with Mr. Boone. Has there? Oh yes, People are concerned, you understand. A young woman living unchaperoned with a widower and his children. It's not proper. I'm working for him, that's all. Is it? Constance leaned in, lowering her voice. Because it seems to me that girls who get sold for flour don't usually end up in respectable situations, no matter how hard they try to pretend otherwise. The words hit like a slap. Evelyn felt her face burn, felt every eye in the vicinity turn toward them. That's enough, a voice said sharply. Evelyn turned to see Mrs. Yates standing there, her face flushed with anger. This is a private conversation, Constance said coolly. No, it's you being cruel to a girl who's done nothing wrong. Mrs. Yates put herself between Evelyn and Constance. Evelyn Hart has worked harder in the last 3 months than you've worked in your entire life. She saved Silas Boone's life in that storm. She's raised those children like they were her own. And you're standing here spreading vicious lies because you've got nothing better to do with your time. Other women were gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Others nodded in agreement with Mrs. Yates. I'm simply stating facts, Constance said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Facts? Mrs. Yates laughed harshly. The fact is that Caleb Hart tried to sell his daughter like livestock, and everyone in this town stood by and watched. The fact is that Silas Boone was the only one decent enough to stop it, and the fact is that Evelyn has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your whole body. How dare you? No, how dare you? Mrs. Yates's voice rose. This girl has been through hell, and instead of showing her kindness, you're trying to shame her for surviving. Well, I won't stand for it, and neither should anyone else. There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. Not everyone, Constance still had her supporters, but enough people that the mayor's wife's face went pale with anger. This isn't over, Constance hissed, then swept away in a rustle of expensive skirts. Mrs. Yates turned to Evelyn, her expression softening. You all right? Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. Don't let her get to you. She's a miserable woman taking it out on anyone she can. Later that afternoon, they announced the baking competition winners. Evelyn had almost forgotten she'd entered, was ready to just collect her dish and leave, when the judge called her name. First place. She stood there, stunned, as they handed her a blue ribbon and a $5 prize. The crowd applauded, some enthusiastically, others grudgingly. Constance Blackwood looked like she'd swallowed glass. Evelyn took her ribbon and walked back through the crowd, her head high. It was just a baking competition, just a stupid blue ribbon. But it felt like more than that. It felt like proof that she was worth something beyond what her father had tried to reduce her to. That night, there was a dance. Evelyn almost didn't stay. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, ready to go home. But Silas convinced her. One dance, he said, then we'll leave. She agreed, mostly because she'd never been to a real dance before. Her father had never allowed it. The barn had been transformed with lanterns and decorations, and a group of musicians was playing fiddle music that made Evelyn's feet want to move, even though she didn't know how. She stood on the sidelines, watching couples spin and laugh, and felt very small and very out of place. Then Silas appeared beside her, holding out his hand. I don't know how to dance, she said. Neither do I, really, but everyone else is doing it, so how hard can it be? He led her onto the floor, and they stumbled through something that might generously be called dancing. Silas stepped on her toes twice. She tripped over her own feet, but he was smiling, really smiling, and Evelyn realized she was too. See, Silas said. Not so bad. Speak for yourself. My toes are going to be bruised tomorrow. Fair point. They were laughing when the music stopped and shouts erupted from outside the barn. Silas's smile vanished instantly. Stay here, he ordered, already moving toward the door. But Evelyn followed anyway, her stomach sinking because she already knew what this was about. Outside, near the side of the barn, a group of men had Silas surrounded. They were rough-looking, the kind who spent more time in saloons than churches. And leading them was a man Evelyn recognized, one of the drifters who'd been with her father that first night. We got business with you, Boone, the drifter said. Don't know what business we could have, Silas replied, his voice calm but his body tense. Caleb Hart says you owe him, says you stole his daughter. His daughter made her own choice. That's not how Caleb tells it. The drifter spat in the dirt. Says you paid him $100 and then decided you didn't want to honor the deal. It was a lie. A complete fabrication. But Evelyn could see some of the onlookers starting to murmur, starting to wonder if maybe there was some truth to it. Caleb Hart is a liar, Silas said flatly. Now get off my property before I make you leave. This ain't your property. This is public ground. The drifter grinned, showing missing teeth. And we're not leaving without what we came for. They rushed him all at once. Silas got his fists up just in time to catch the first man in the jaw, dropping him like a stone. But there were too many of them, and they came from all sides. Evelyn screamed, looking around wildly for help. But most people just stood there watching, too shocked or too afraid to intervene. Then Wyatt appeared out of nowhere, throwing himself at one of the attackers. The man backhanded the boy, sending him sprawling, and Evelyn saw Silas's eyes go wild with rage. He fought like something savage, like he'd forgotten these were people and not just obstacles to destroy. But even he couldn't fight 5 men at once. One of them pulled a knife, slashing at Silas's side. Blood bloomed across his shirt, dark and terrible in the lantern light. No! Evelyn didn't think, just moved. She grabbed a shovel leaning against the barn wall and swung it with all her strength, catching the knife wielder across the back. He went down hard. That seemed to break whatever spell had frozen everyone else. Suddenly men were jumping in, pulling the attackers off Silas, shouting for the deputy. The fight ended as quickly as it had started, leaving Silas on the ground, bleeding from the knife wound in his side, his face already swelling with bruises. Wyatt was crying, clutching his arm where he'd been hit. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside Silas. How bad is it? I'm fine, he grunted, trying to sit up and immediately going pale. You're not fine, you're bleeding everywhere. Evelyn pressed her hand against the wound, trying to stop the blood flow. It was deep, but not as deep as it could have been. Someone get the doctor! People scattered, shouting. The attackers were being restrained, though they were still yelling threats and obscenities. Through all the chaos, Evelyn kept pressure on Silas's wound and tried not to think about how close he'd come to dying. Again. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. You saved me, he said quietly. You saved me first, she replied, the words coming out rough. We're even. No. Silas raised his hand and touched her face, his fingers gentle despite the blood and bruises. We're not. There was something in his eyes, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. But before either of them could say anything else, the doctor arrived and the moment was lost in the chaos of stitching and bandaging and making sure everyone would survive the night. Later, after they'd made it home and gotten Silas into bed and checked on Wyatt's bruises, Evelyn sat on the porch and watched the snow start to fall. It was early for snow, but nothing this year had followed the normal patterns. She heard the door open behind her, felt Silas's presence before he spoke. You should be resting, she said without turning around. So should you. Can't sleep. Neither can I. He sat down beside her with a grimace, holding his bandaged ribs carefully. They sat in silence for a while, watching the snow accumulate on the fence posts. This is my fault, Evelyn said finally. All of it. Your injuries, Wyatt getting hurt, those men attacking you. If I hadn't come here, Don't, Silas interrupted. Don't do that. But it's true. It's not. He turns to look at her, his face serious. Those men attacked me because they're violent drunks who'll do anything for money. Caleb's spreading lies because he's a bitter bastard who can't accept that he lost. None of that is your fault. The town thinks, I don't care what the town thinks. His voice was fierce. And you shouldn't either. Easy for you to say. No, it's not. Silas was quiet for a moment. You want to know what people said when I married Catherine? They said I was too rough for her, that I'd drag her down, that she'd regret it. They talked for months, made her life hell with their gossip and their judgment. Evelyn looked at him, surprised. What did you do? We ignored them, lived our lives. Eventually they found something else to talk about. His expression softened. Catherine used to say that people who had nothing better to do than judge others weren't worth worrying about. She was right. She sounds like she was special. She was. Silas looked down at his hands. And I failed her. When she needed me most, I couldn't save her. That wasn't your fault either. I know. In my head, I know that. But knowing something and believing it are different things. Evelyn understood that better than most. The children don't blame you. Wyatt does. Not anymore. Not after tonight. She thought about the boy throwing himself into a fight to protect his father. He loves you. They all do. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, he said, "I need to tell you something." Evelyn's heart started beating faster. "What?" "I've been thinking about this for a while now. Since the storm, really. Maybe even before that." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "When you first came here, I told myself it was just practical. You needed help. I needed help. It made sense. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being just practical." "Silas, let me finish." He took a breath. "You've brought life back to this house. To my children. To me. And I know it's too soon. And I know this situation is complicated. But I need you to know that I intend to court you properly. When the time is right. If you'll have me." Evelyn stared at him, her mind reeling. "Court me? Yes. And eventually, if you're willing," he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. "I want to marry you, Evelyn. Not because it's proper or practical, but because I—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because I what?" Evelyn whispered. "Because I love you," Silas said simply. "And I think I have for a while now." The world tilted sideways. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think. No one had ever said those words to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Silas was looking at her now, like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. "You don't have to answer now," Silas said quickly, seeing her expression. "I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that you're not just hired help to me. You're—" Evelyn kissed him. It was impulsive and graceless and probably a terrible idea, but she didn't care. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face like she was something fragile that might break. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Silas looked dazed. "Does that mean yes?" he asked. Evelyn laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest. "That means we'll see. Ask me again when you're not bleeding from multiple wounds and I haven't just had the worst day of my life." "Fair enough." Silas smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "I can wait." They sat there on the porch, snow falling around them, and for the first time since her father had thrown her on that floor in the general store, Evelyn felt something that might have been happiness. It was fragile and tentative and probably wouldn't last. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. The kiss changed things, but not in the way Evelyn expected. She thought it might make things awkward between them, or rushed, or complicated. Instead, it just made everything clearer. Silas kept his word about courting her properly. He didn't push, didn't assume. He just treated her with a quiet respect that made her chest ache sometimes. He'd bring her coffee in the morning before she'd even started breakfast. He'd ask her opinion on ranch decisions like it mattered. He'd look at her across the dinner table with an expression that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. And slowly, carefully, the ranch started to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. The children noticed. Of course they did. "Are you and Pa going to get married?" Lila asked one morning while Evelyn was braiding her hair. Evelyn's hand stuttered. "What makes you ask that?" "'Cause he looks at you the way he used to look at Mama." Lila twisted around to face her, her small face serious. "But different too." "Different how?" "Like he's scared you might disappear." Out of the mouths of children. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she just finished the braid in silence. Wyatt was more direct. He cornered her in the barn one afternoon while she was feeding the horses. "If you marry Pa," he said without preamble, "does that mean you're staying forever?" "I'm staying regardless," Evelyn replied carefully. "But are you?" Wyatt's voice was sharp with something that might have been fear. "Or are you going to leave like everyone else?" "Everyone else." He meant his mother, Evelyn realized with a pang. The boy was terrified of losing someone again. "I'm not going anywhere," Evelyn said firmly. "Not unless you all want me gone." "We don't." Wyatt looked down at his feet. "I know I was awful to you at first, but I don't want you to leave." "Then I won't." He nodded once, satisfied, and went back to work. But Evelyn stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of that promise. She'd meant it when she said it, but promises were easy to make and hard to keep, especially when her father was still out there, still plotting. Caleb had been quiet since the attack at the dance. Too quiet. Evelyn didn't trust it. "He's planning something," she told Silas one evening while they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Probably," Silas agreed, "but whatever it is, we'll handle it." "You can't know that." "No, I can't, but I'm not going to spend every day waiting for the other shoe to drop." He looked at her, his expression serious. "Neither should you." But it was hard not to worry. Every time she went to town, she'd catch glimpses of her father, drunk in the saloon, or stumbling down the street, or just standing on a corner staring at nothing. He looked worse every time she saw him. Thinner, meaner, like he was being eaten alive from the inside out. Part of her felt sorry for him. The rest of her just felt tired. October bled into November. The ranch work intensified as they prepared for the harsh winter everyone knew was coming. Silas's injuries from the fight had healed enough that he could work again, though Evelyn caught him wincing sometimes when he thought no one was looking. The town's attitude toward her had shifted too, though not uniformly. Some people, like Mrs. Yates and Mr. Brennan, had become genuine allies. Others remained coldly judgmental, following Constance Blackwood's lead and treating Evelyn like something shameful. And then there were the ones who just watched, waiting to see which way the wind would blow before they picked a side. Evelyn tried not to care, tried to follow Silas's advice and just live her life. But it was hard when she could feel the weight of judgment every time she set foot in town. Things came to a head again at the annual Harvest Festival in late November. The festival was a big deal in Dry Creek, 3 days of competitions, exhibitions, and socializing before winter locked everyone inside for months. Evelyn hadn't planned on going, but Silas insisted. "You won the baking competition at the fall fair," he pointed out. "You should be proud of that. Besides, I want to show you off." "Show me off?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "As my—" Silas paused, searching for the right word. "As the woman I'm courting, properly and publicly." Heat crept up Evelyn's neck. "That's going to cause talk." "Let it. I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you." So they went to the festival as a family, Silas and Evelyn, and all 3 children. People stared, of course, whispered. But Silas kept his hand on the small of Evelyn's back, steady and sure, and for once Evelyn didn't feel like she had to shrink under the attention. The first day passed without incident. Wyatt entered the junior roping competition and took 3rd place. Lila won a ribbon for her drawing of a horse. Noah just seemed happy to eat candy and watch the festivities. The second day was when things got complicated. Evelyn was at the quilting exhibition, not because she knew anything about quilting, but because Mrs. Yates had asked her to come see the one she'd made, when Constance Blackwood appeared with her usual entourage of society women. "Well, well," Constance said, her voice carrying across the tent. "Miss Hart. Still playing house with the Boone family, I see." Evelyn's spine stiffened, but she kept her voice level. "Mrs. Blackwood. You know, it's really quite scandalous," Constance continued, addressing her friends, but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "A young woman living unchaperoned with a widower. One wonders what example that sets for his children." "I'm working for him," Evelyn said, her patience already wearing thin. "That's hardly scandalous. Is that what we're calling it now?" Constance's smile was vicious. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you've trapped a grieving man into some sort of improper arrangement. First you get yourself sold like livestock, and now you're trying to buy your way into respectability through Silas Boone." The tent had gone completely silent. Every eye was on them. Evelyn felt something snap inside her. She was tired. Tired of the judgment. Tired of the gossip. Tired of being made to feel ashamed for surviving. "You want to know what's improper?" Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "What's improper is standing by and watching a man try to sell his daughter and doing nothing. What's improper is spreading lies about people you don't know and don't understand. What's improper is using your position in this town to make yourself feel better by tearing other people down." Constance's face went red. "How dare you?" "I dare because I've got nothing left to lose," Evelyn interrupted. "You've already decided what you think of me. You and everyone else who looks at me and sees something shameful. But you know what? I don't care anymore." "You should care," Constance hissed. "Reputation is everything." "Is it?" Evelyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. My reputation was ruined the day my father threw me on the floor of that general store. You think I don't know what people say about me? That I'm damaged goods? That I'm taking advantage? That I'm not good enough to be in polite society?" She looked around the tent, meeting the eyes of every woman there. "But here's what you don't understand," Evelyn continued. "I've survived things you can't even imagine. I've been beaten, starved, sold like property. I've ridden into a blizzard to save a man I barely knew. I've stood between a child and a gun. I've worked myself bloody to keep a ranch running and a family together. So forgive me if I don't particularly care what you think about my reputation." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Mrs. Yates started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Within seconds, other women joined her. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to matter. Constance looked around, her face pale with fury and humiliation. Without another word, she turned and swept out of the tent, her friends scrambling after her. Evelyn's hands were shaking. She'd never stood up for herself like that before, never said those things out loud. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. "Well," Mrs. Yates said with a grin, "that was overdue." Several women came up to Evelyn after that, offering quiet words of support. Not everyone. There were still plenty who looked at her with disapproval or pity, but enough that Evelyn felt a little less alone. She was heading back to find Silas when she ran into a group of ranch wives she vaguely recognized. They were younger women, their hands work-roughened, their dresses practical rather than fashionable. "Miss Hart," one of them said. Her name was Sarah, Evelyn remembered. She was married to a rancher out near the Eastern Pass. "We just wanted to say, what you did back there took guts." "I probably shouldn't have lost my temper," Evelyn admitted. "Are you kidding? Someone needed to put Constance Blackwood in her place." Sarah smiled. "She's been running this town like her own personal kingdom for too long. About time someone stood up to her." Another woman nodded. "And what you said about surviving, that was real. Most of these society women don't know the first thing about real work or real struggle." "You're one of us," a third woman added. "Ranch women. We look out for each other." The simple acceptance in their voices made Evelyn's throat tight. "Thank you," she managed. She found Silas near the livestock pens, examining someone's prize bull. The moment he saw her face, his expression shifted to concern. "What happened?" "I may have just made an enemy for life," Evelyn said. "Constance Blackwood. How'd you know?" "She's been gunning for you since you got here. What did you do?" Evelyn told him, and by the end of it, Silas was grinning. "That's my girl," he said, and the pride in his voice made Evelyn's heart skip. "Your girl?" "If you'll have me." He said it casually, but his eyes were serious. Before Evelyn could answer, Wyatt came running up, his face flushed with excitement. "Pa, they're starting the roping exhibition. Can I enter the adult category?" "You're 12, Silas pointed out, "but I'm good enough. You know I am." Silas looked at Evelyn, something questioning in his expression. She realized he was asking her opinion, treating her like a partner in decisions about his children. "He is good enough," Evelyn said. "But it's your call." Silas looked back at Wyatt, seeing the hope and determination in the boy's face. "All right, but you compete fair, and you don't complain if you lose." Wyatt whooped and ran off to sign up. "He's gonna win," Evelyn predicted. "Probably," Silas agreed. "Kid's got a natural talent with a rope." They watched the competition together, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Wyatt didn't win. He came in fourth, beaten by men twice his age and experience, but he held his head high anyway. The evening brought a dance, and this time Evelyn was ready for it. She wore her best dress, still plain by town standards, but clean and mended. Silas offered her his arm like she was something precious, and they walked into that barn together while half the town watched. Let them watch, Evelyn thought. Let them see that I'm not ashamed. They danced, badly, because neither of them had any real skill at it, and laughed when Silas stepped on her feet again. Noah and Lila joined them on the floor, and even Wyatt cracked a smile watching his father attempt to waltz. For a few hours, everything felt almost normal, almost peaceful. Then someone shouted from outside, and the music stopped. Evelyn knew before she even turned around. She could feel it in her bones, that familiar dread that meant her father was near. She was right. Caleb Hart stood in the barn doorway, swaying drunk, his face twisted with rage. But he wasn't alone this time. He'd brought at least a dozen men with him, drifters and drunks and troublemakers, all armed and looking for a fight. Silas Boone, Caleb's voice echoed through the suddenly silent barn. You owe me money and my daughter. Time to pay up. I don't owe you anything, Silas said calmly, but Evelyn could see his hand moving toward his hip, where he kept his pistol. The hell you don't. You took my property. You're going to pay for it, one way or another. Evelyn's not property, and she's not going anywhere with you. We'll see about that, Caleb gestured to his men. Boys. They moved forward as a group, but before they could get far, Deputy Hendricks stepped between them and the crowd. That's far enough, Hendricks said, his own gun drawn. You're drunk, Caleb, and you're trespassing. Leave now or I'll arrest every one of you. On what charge? Disturbing the peace, threatening violence, public intoxication? Take your pick. Hendricks' voice was hard. You've caused enough trouble for one lifetime. Time to go home. Not without what's mine. She's not yours! The shout came from Wyatt, who'd pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His young voice shook with fury. She's ours now. She's part of our family, and you're not taking her. Caleb's eyes fixed on the boy, and something mean flickered across his face. That your kid, Boone? Teaching him to steal other men's property? Wyatt, get back, Silas ordered, but the boy didn't move. You want to know what property is? Wyatt said, his voice getting stronger. Property is things. Cattle and horses and land. Evelyn's not a thing. She's a person, and she's worth 10 of you. Some of the crowd murmured agreement. Others just watched, tense and waiting. Caleb laughed, but it sounded forced. Brave words from a boy. Let's see how brave you are when... He lurched forward, reaching for Wyatt, and everything exploded. Silas moved first, putting himself between Caleb and his son. The drunk men surged forward. Women screamed. Someone fired a gun into the air, and chaos erupted. Evelyn lost sight of Silas in the crush of bodies. She saw Wyatt go down, saw Noah trying to drag Lila to safety. Deputy Hendricks was shouting, trying to restore order, but no one was listening. She pushed through the crowd, desperate to reach the children, when someone grabbed her arm. She spun, ready to fight, and found herself face to face with her father. Up close, he looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes yellow, his breath sour with rot and whiskey. He looked like a man dying from the inside out. You did this, Caleb hissed, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to bruise. You destroyed everything. You destroyed yourself, Evelyn shot back, trying to pull away. I'm your father. You're supposed to... You stopped being my father the day you tried to sell me. Evelyn wrenched her arm free. And I stopped being your daughter the moment I left. Caleb's face went purple. He raised his hand to strike her, and Evelyn braced herself for the blow. It never came. Silas appeared out of nowhere, catching Caleb's wrist mid-swing. His face was bloody. His knuckles split, but his grip was iron strong. Touch her, Silas said quietly, and I'll break every bone in your hand. You can't keep her from me forever, Caleb spat. Watch me. Silas twisted Caleb's arms, forcing the older man to his knees. Around them, the fight was ending. Deputy Hendricks and several other men had managed to subdue most of Caleb's crew. It was over. Caleb knelt in the dirt, breathing hard, his eyes fixed on Evelyn with something that might have been hatred or might have been desperation. She couldn't tell anymore, and she realized with sudden clarity that she didn't care. This man had controlled her life through fear for 18 years. He'd made her feel small and worthless and afraid. But looking at him now, broken and pathetic and consumed by his own bitterness, she felt nothing but pity. You're done, Evelyn said quietly. You've lost, and you're going to spend the rest of your miserable life knowing that I'm happier without you than I ever was with you. The words hit him harder than any physical blow could have. Caleb's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. Then Deputy Hendricks hauled him to his feet. You're under arrest, Hendricks said. Again, and this time I'm making sure the judge throws the book at you. As they dragged her father away, Evelyn felt Silas's hand on her shoulder. You all right? He asked. I think so. She looked around at the destroyed barn, the frightened crowd, the children huddled together near the far wall. Is anyone hurt? Few bruises, nothing serious. Silas touched her face gently, checking for injuries. He didn't hurt you? No, you stopped him. Always will, Silas said simply. The festival was over after that. People drifted home in small groups, talking in low voices about what they'd witnessed. Some looked at Evelyn with sympathy, others with judgment, most with simple curiosity. Evelyn didn't care what any of them thought anymore. She'd meant what she said to Constance earlier. She was done letting other people's opinions control her life. The ride home was quiet. The children were exhausted, Lila asleep in Wyatt's arms, Noah's head nodding against Silas's shoulder. Evelyn sat beside Silas on the wagon seat, her body aching with exhaustion, but her mind strangely clear. "Thank you," she said finally, "for protecting me. Again. Don't thank me for that. It's not something you should have to thank someone for." "Maybe not, but I'm still grateful." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Silas said, "I meant what I said before, about courting you, about wanting to marry you eventually." Evelyn's heart stuttered. "I know. But I need you to understand something." He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'm not asking because it's practical, or because the children need a mother, or because the town expects it. I'm asking because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." "Silas, you don't have to answer now," he continued. "I just need you to know that when I do ask, properly ask with a ring and everything, it's going to be because you're everything I want, not because you're convenient or available or anything else, just because you're you." Evelyn's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. "You're making it very hard to say no." "Good. That's the idea." He smiled and it transformed his entire face. "But I can wait. I'm patient." "Are you? When it comes to you?" "Yes." They got home late, the children barely awake enough to stumble to their beds. Silas's injuries from the fight needed tending. Nothing serious, just split knuckles and bruises that would hurt like hell tomorrow. So Evelyn made him sit still while she cleaned and bandaged everything. "You're getting good at this," Silas observed, watching her work. "I've had a lot of practice lately. You keep getting into fights." "Only when people threaten my family." "My family." The words settled over Evelyn like a warm blanket. Family. She'd never really had one before. Not a real one. Not one that felt safe and solid and permanent. "Can I ask you something?" she said, tying off the last bandage. "Anything." "Your wife, Catherine. Do you still love her?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "I'll always love her. She gave me 3 beautiful children and 10 good years. That doesn't just disappear." Evelyn nodded, trying to ignore the sharp pain in her chest. "But," Silas continued, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes, "loving her doesn't mean I can't love you. The heart's got more room than people think. And what I feel for you, it's different from what I felt for her. Not less. Just different." "How?" "With Catherine, it was easy. We grew up together, knew each other's families, fit into each other's lives without much effort." He touched Evelyn's face gently. "With you, it's harder, messier, but it's also deeper. You've seen me at my worst, broken and grieving and barely holding it together. And you didn't run. You stayed. You fought. You made me want to be better." "You are better," Evelyn said softly, "because of you." They sat there in the quiet kitchen, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the wind outside. Evelyn thought about everything that had happened, the violence, the gossip, the constant struggle. Part of her wanted to be afraid of what came next, but sitting here with Silas, feeling safe and valued and maybe even loved, she couldn't find room for fear anymore. "I need to tell you something too," she said. "What's that?" "I think—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "I think I'm falling in love with you. Maybe have been for a while now. And that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because everyone I've ever loved has either left me or hurt me or died. And I don't know if I can survive losing someone else." Silas pulled her closer, his arms strong and steady around her. "You're not going to lose me. I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted. "Life doesn't come with guarantees. But I can promise that I'll fight like hell to stay. And that whatever time we have, I'll spend it proving that you're worth every risk." Evelyn buried her face against his chest, breathing in the smell of him, leather and wood smoke and something uniquely Silas. She felt his heart beating steady beneath her cheek, felt the solid warmth of him, and thought maybe, just maybe, she could believe him. The next few weeks were strange. Caleb was in jail again, this time on charges serious enough that everyone knew he wouldn't be getting out anytime soon. The town seemed divided about what had happened at the festival. Some people praised Evelyn for standing up to Constance. Others said she'd caused a scene and brought violence to a family event. Evelyn tried not to care, tried to focus on the ranch work and the children and building something resembling a normal life. But it was hard sometimes. Hard when women crossed the street to avoid her in town. Hard when she overheard whispers about her being unfit to raise children. Hard when Constance Blackwood made pointed comments about loose women at the church social. "Ignore them," Silas said every time she came home frustrated. "They'll find something else to talk about eventually." "When?" "When we give them something better to talk about." He smiled mysteriously. "Trust me." Evelyn didn't know what that meant, but she trusted him anyway. Then came the first serious snowfall of December, and with it, disaster. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke. She was out of bed before she was fully conscious, her heart pounding, her mind racing. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant danger. She ran downstairs and found Silas already dressed, staring out the window at an orange glow in the distance. The barn was on fire. "Stay with the children," Silas ordered, already moving toward the door. "Like hell," Evelyn shot back, pulling on her boots. "Those are our horses in there." They ran through the snow together, the cold air burning Evelyn's lungs. The barn was fully engulfed, flames shooting through the roof, the heat intense even from 30 feet away. She could hear the horses inside, screaming in terror. "We have to get them out," Evelyn shouted over the roar of the fire. "It's too dangerous." But Evelyn was already moving. She grabbed a bucket of water, dumped it over her head and shoulders, and ran straight into the burning barn. The heat was overwhelming. Smoke filled her lungs, making her cough and gag. She could barely see, could barely breathe, but she could hear the horses kicking against their stalls, wild with panic. She found the first horse and fumbled with the latch, her hands shaking. The wood was already hot to the touch. Finally it gave way, and the horse bolted past her toward the door. One down, 4 more to go. She made it to the second stall when she heard the crack above her. She looked up just in time to see a beam breaking free from the ceiling, coming straight down. She tried to move, but her dress caught on something. The beam fell. And then Silas was there, shoving her out of the way, taking the impact himself. They both went down hard, the burning wood pinning Silas's leg. "No!" Evelyn scrambled to her feet, grabbed the beam, and pulled with strength she didn't know she had. It shifted enough for Silas to drag himself free. "Get out!" he gasped, his face gray with pain. "Not without the horses." She ignored him, moving to the next stall. Her lungs were screaming, her vision going spotty, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. She freed 2 more horses, then went back for the last one. The smoke was so thick now, she couldn't see more than a foot in front of her. She felt her way along the wall, found the stall, found the latch. The horse wouldn't move. "Come on," Evelyn begged, pulling at its halter. "Please, please move." Behind her, she heard a terrible groaning sound. The barn was coming down. Then Silas was beside her again, his face covered in soot, his leg dragging. Together they got the horse moving, pushed it toward where the door should be, followed the animal out into the blessed cold air. They collapsed in the snow 20 feet from the barn, coughing and gasping. Seconds later, the entire structure caved in with a roar, sending sparks shooting into the night sky. Evelyn lay there, her body shaking, her lungs burning, watching everything they'd worked to save go up in flames. The horses were safe, at least. They'd managed that much. "You're insane," Silas said beside her, his voice hoarse. "Completely insane." "Probably," Evelyn agreed, then started laughing. It hurt her chest, made her cough, but she couldn't stop. They'd almost died, almost burned to death trying to save some horses. And somehow, they were still alive. Silas looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Then he started laughing too, and they lay there in the snow together, laughing like lunatics while the barn burned and the children came running from the house, shouting in fear and confusion. Later, after they'd assured the children everyone was fine and gotten Silas's burns treated and accounted for all the livestock, they sat on the porch and watched the last embers die. "This was him," Evelyn said quietly. "My father. He did this." "We don't know that." "Yes, we do." She turned to look at Silas. "He's in jail, but his friends aren't." This is his revenge for what happened at the festival. Silas didn't argue. They both knew she was right. So, what do we do? Evelyn asked. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up, went into the house, and came back with something in his hand. A ring. Gold, with a small stone, worn smooth with age. This was my mother's, he said, kneeling in front of Evelyn. I was going to wait. Going to do this properly, with romance and planning and all that. But I'm done waiting. Evelyn's breath caught. You almost died tonight, Silas continued, his voice rough. Ran into a burning barn without a second thought because you were trying to save what's ours. And I realized something watching you do that. What? That life's too short and too unpredictable to waste time on should-haves and maybes. He held up the ring. Evelyn Hart, you're the strongest, bravest, most stubborn woman I've ever met. You've saved my life, saved my children, saved this ranch more times than I can count. And I don't want to spend another day pretending you're just working for me when what I really want is to spend the rest of my life with you. Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now, but she didn't care. I know it's fast, Silas said. I know people will talk. I know it's complicated and messy, and nothing about this is proper. But I love you. And if you'll have me, if you'll take a damaged widower with 3 kids and a burned-down barn and more problems than solutions, then I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you. You're already worthy, Evelyn whispered. Is that a yes? She looked at him. This hard, complicated man who'd given her a choice when no one else would, who'd stood between her and violence more times than she could count, who'd taught her that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be loved. Yes, Evelyn said. Yes, I'll marry you. Silas slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promises, while the last of the barn burned itself out behind them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. We're getting married, Evelyn said, like she couldn't quite believe it. We're getting married, Silas agreed. From inside the house, they heard Lila's voice. I told you they were going to get married. And Wyatt's response, Shut up, Lila. They'll hear you. Silas and Evelyn looked at each other and started laughing again. Tomorrow, they'd deal with the barn. With her father's threats, with the town's judgment and all the complicated, messy realities of building a life together. But tonight, sitting on the porch with Silas's arm around her and his mother's ring on her finger, Evelyn felt something she'd never felt before. Hope. Real, solid, unbreakable hope. She was going to marry Silas Boone. She was going to be a mother to his children. She was going to build a life here, on this ranch, with these people. And no amount of gossip or violence or judgment was going to take that away from her. The girl who'd been sold for flour was about to become a wife, a mother, a partner, and she was going to fight like hell to keep it. News of the engagement spread through Dry Creek faster than the fire that had taken the barn. By noon the next day, everyone knew, and everyone had an opinion. Evelyn tried not to care. She had work to do. The barn might be gone, but the animals still needed shelter before the next storm hit. Silas was already drawing up plans for a temporary structure, his injured leg propped up while he sketched measurements in the dirt with a stick. We'll need lumber from town, he said, wincing as he shifted his weight. And help. Can't do this alone, not with winter coming on. I'll go to town, Evelyn offered. Take Wyatt with you. I don't want you going alone. She understood what he wasn't saying. Her father might be in jail, but his friends weren't, and desperate men did desperate things. The ride to town was tense. Wyatt kept his hand near the rifle strapped to his saddle, his eyes scanning the horizon like he expected trouble. At 13, he was already learning to think like a man protecting his family. It made Evelyn's heart ache. You nervous about the wedding? Wyatt asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. A little. Why? Just wondered. I mean, you're going to be our ma now. Officially. Does that bother you? Wyatt was quiet for a moment. No, but I keep thinking about my real ma, wondering if she'd be okay with it. Evelyn chose her words carefully. Your mother loved you more than anything, and from what your pa's told me, she'd want him to be happy. Want all of you to be happy. You make him happy, Wyatt said simply. I can see it. He smiles more now. Doesn't wake up with nightmares as much. Evelyn hadn't known about the nightmares. Silas never mentioned them. They reached town around mid-morning. The general store was busy, full of people stocking up before the next storm. Conversation stopped when Evelyn walked in. Eyes followed her to the lumber section. She ignored them, focused on what they needed, but when she went to the counter to place her order, Mr. Brennan shook his head. "Can't sell to you on credit, Miss Hart. Not with your situation being what it is." "My situation?" Brennan looked uncomfortable. "Word is your father's still claiming you owe him. Says the engagement is proof Silas bought you, just like he always said. Judge is looking into it." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "That's insane. I'm 18 years old. I can make my own decisions." "Maybe so, but until the legal stuff gets sorted out, I can't extend credit." "Boss's orders." He glanced toward the back office, where Evelyn could see Constance Blackwood's husband watching through the window. Of course, Constance was still making her life difficult, even now. "I have money," Evelyn said, reaching for the small purse Silas had given her. "Not enough for what you need," Brennan said quietly. "Lumber costs have gone up. That barn you're trying to build, you're looking at $80 minimum." They had 40. Maybe. Evelyn felt the familiar weight of helplessness settling over her shoulders. They needed that lumber. The animals wouldn't survive the winter without shelter. "There has to be something we can do," she said. "There is." The voice came from behind her. Evelyn turned to find Mrs. Yates standing there, several other ranch women behind her. "Sarah and I talked last night," Mrs. Yates said, "about what happened with the barn, about how you and Silas almost died trying to save those horses." "We did what anyone would do," Evelyn said. "No, you did what family does," Mrs. Yates smiled. "And out here, when one family's in trouble, the others step up. We're putting together a barn raising this Saturday. Everyone's bringing what they can, lumber, nails, labor. We'll get you a new barn built before the next storm hits." Evelyn stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. "You don't have to do that." "We know. We want to." Sarah stepped forward. "Besides, it's tradition. When someone's getting married, the community helps them start their new life right." "But people have been saying—" "Some people," Mrs. Yates interrupted, "not everyone. And the ones who matter? We know what you're really about. You're one of us, Evelyn, whether Constance Blackwood likes it or not." Evelyn's throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded, blinking back tears. By the time she and Wyatt got back to the ranch, word had spread even further. Silas met them at the gate, his expression grim. "Deputy Hendricks came by," he said. "Your father's filed a legal complaint, claiming I coerced you into the engagement." "That's ridiculous." "Doesn't matter if it's ridiculous. Judge is taking it seriously. We have to appear before him next week to prove the engagement is legitimate." "How do we prove something like that?" Silas pulled her close, his arms solid around her. "We tell the truth. We show them we chose this. Both of us." But Evelyn knew the truth wasn't always enough. Not when people wanted to believe the worst. The days leading up to the hearing were tense. Evelyn tried to focus on preparations for the barn raising, but her mind kept circling back to her father. Even from jail, he was still controlling her life, still trying to break her. The night before they were supposed to appear before the judge, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. "You're worrying," Silas said, joining her. "Of course I'm worrying. What if the judge believes him? What if he rules that I have to—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. "He won't." "You can't know that." Silas took her hand, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm. "Listen to me. That judge has known your father for years, knows what kind of man he is, and he's seen what you've done with this ranch, how you've cared for my children. He's not going to side with Caleb." "But what if he does?" "Then we fight it. We appeal. We do whatever we have to do." Silas's voice was steel. "But I'm not letting them take you away from me. From us. I don't care what I have to do." Evelyn leaned against him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I'm scared." "I know, but you're also the bravest person I've ever met. And whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." The courthouse was packed when they arrived. It seemed like half the town had shown up to watch. Evelyn saw Mrs. Yates and Sarah in the front row, their faces supportive. She also saw Constance Blackwood and her circle, their expressions smug. And there, in chains, was her father. Caleb looked worse than the last time she'd seen him. Prison had aged him years in just weeks. His hair was greasy, his clothes filthy, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. When he saw Evelyn, something twisted in his expression. "That's her," he said loudly. "My daughter, the one he stole." Judge Morrison banged his gavel. "Quiet, Mr. Hart. You'll get your turn to speak." The proceedings started with Caleb's lawyer, some slick-talking man from the next county over, laying out the case. According to him, Silas Boone had taken advantage of a desperate situation to acquire property, Evelyn, that rightfully belonged to Caleb Hart. The engagement was evidence of an illegal transaction. Evelyn sat there, her hands clenched in her lap, listening to herself be reduced to property again. It was the general store all over again, except this time it was wrapped in legal language. Then it was their turn. Silas's lawyer was simpler, more direct. He called Deputy Hendricks first, who testified about what he'd witnessed in the general store that day, about how Caleb had tried to trade his daughter, about how Silas had stopped it. "And what did Mr. Boone offer in exchange for Miss Hart?" the lawyer asked. "Nothing," Hendricks said firmly. "He offered her a choice, a job and a place to stay. No money changed hands." "How can you be certain?" "Because I was there. I saw the whole thing." Next came Mrs. Yates, who testified about the work Evelyn had done on the ranch, about how she'd risked her life in the storm to save Silas and Wyatt, about the barn fire and the horses. "Does that sound like someone who was purchased?" the lawyer asked, "or someone who chose to be there?" Then they called Evelyn. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Judge Morrison looked at her over his spectacles. "Miss Hart," he said, "I need you to tell me in your own words what happened the day you left your father's house." Evelyn took a breath and told the truth. All of it. The attempt to sell her, Silas's offer, the choice he'd given her. She didn't hold back about her father's abuse, about the beatings and the starvation and the fear. "And when Mr. Boone proposed marriage," the judge asked, "did you feel pressured to accept?" "No, sir." "Why did you accept then?" Evelyn looked across the courtroom at Silas, at the man who'd given her a choice when no one else would, who'd stood between her and violence, who'd taught her what love could look like when it wasn't twisted up with fear. "Because I love him," she said simply, "and because he loves me. Not as property, not as a transaction, as a person." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for silence. "Mr. Hart," he said, turning to Caleb, "do you have anything to say?" Caleb struggled to his feet, his chains rattling. "She's lying. He bought her, paid me $100 and then changed his mind about the terms." "Do you have any proof of this transaction?" No, but any witnesses besides yourself?" Caleb looked around wildly. "The men who were there in the general store. We've already heard from Deputy Hendricks, who was in the store that day. He testified no money changed hands." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Hart, you've spent the last 6 months spreading lies about your daughter and Mr. Boone. You've incited violence, disturbed the peace, and now you're wasting this court's time with baseless accusations." "But she's mine," Caleb's voice cracked. "She's my daughter, my property." "Your daughter is 18 years old," the judge said coldly, "which makes her a legal adult. She can make her own decisions about her life, including who she marries. You have no claim on her." "But I'm her father." "You're a drunk and a wife-beater who tried to sell his own child." Judge Morrison's voice was harsh. "I've seen men like you before, Mr. Hart. Men who confuse ownership with love, who think they can control people through fear and violence." He turned to Evelyn. "Miss Hart, I want to be very clear about something. You are not property. You never were. What your father tried to do was morally reprehensible, and the only reason it's not illegal is because our laws haven't caught up with basic human decency yet." He looked at Caleb. "But that doesn't mean I have to tolerate it in my courtroom." The judge banged his gavel once. "I find no evidence of coercion or illegal transaction. The engagement between Miss Evelyn Hart and Mr. Silas Boone is legitimate. Case dismissed." The courtroom exploded. Some people cheered, others booed. Constance Blackwood looked like she'd swallowed poison, and Caleb Hart collapsed in his chains, sobbing. Evelyn didn't feel triumphant. She just felt tired. Tired of fighting, tired of defending herself, tired of her father's endless attempts to drag her back into the darkness. But when Silas pulled her into his arms, relief flooded through her. It was over. Finally, truly over. "You're free," Silas murmured against her hair. We're free, Evelyn corrected. They left the courthouse hand in hand, ignoring the stares and whispers. Let people talk. They'd earned the right to their happiness. Saturday came cold and bright, perfect weather for a barn raising. Evelyn woke before dawn, her stomach full of nervous energy. Today their friends and neighbors would come together to rebuild what the fire had destroyed, and in 3 weeks she'd marry Silas Boone. The first wagons arrived around 7. The Yates family, followed by Sarah and her husband with a load of lumber. Then the Brennans, the Coopers, the Johnsons, even some people Evelyn barely knew showed up, bringing tools and supplies and willing hands. By 8 o'clock, there were 30 people on the ranch, organizing into work crews. The men handled the heavy construction. The women set up cooking stations and organized supplies. The children ran around underfoot, getting in the way but keeping spirits high. Constance Blackwood didn't come. Neither did her usual circle. But enough people came that their absence didn't matter. Evelyn worked alongside everyone else, hammering nails and hauling boards. Her hands blistered, her back ached. But every time she looked up and saw the barn taking shape, saw these people working together to help her and Silas build a life, she felt something warm expand in her chest. Around noon, Wyatt appeared at her elbow. "There's someone here to see you," he said, his expression odd. Evelyn followed him to the front of the property, where a wagon she didn't recognize had pulled up. A man she'd never seen before stood beside it, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Hart?" he asked. "Yes?" "Name's Thomas Reed. I'm a lawyer from Cheyenne." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "I have news about your father." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He died last night. In jail." The world tilted. Evelyn grabbed the wagon to steady herself. "How?" "Doctor said his liver gave out. Years of drinking finally caught up with him." Reed handed her the envelope. "He left a letter. Asked me to deliver it to you if anything happened to him." Evelyn stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "I don't want it." "I understand, but it's yours regardless. What you do with it is your choice." He tipped his hat and left. Evelyn stood there, the envelope burning in her hands, her mind spinning. Her father was dead. The man who'd terrorized her for 18 years, who'd tried to sell her, who'd spent his last months trying to destroy her chance at happiness, gone. She should feel relieved, triumphant, free. Instead, she just felt empty. Silas found her an hour later, sitting behind the half-built barn, the unopened letter in her lap. "Wyatt told me," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." Evelyn turned the envelope over in her hands. "Part of me is glad he's gone. Part of me feels like I should cry. But mostly I just feel nothing. That's allowed." "Is it? He was my father. Shouldn't I feel something?" "He stopped being your father a long time ago," Silas said gently. "You don't owe him grief." Evelyn looked at the letter. "He wanted me to read this." "Do you want to?" "No, but I think I need to." She opened it. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. The words were short. "Evelyn, I know you won't forgive me. Don't expect you to. I was a bad father, a worse husband. Your mama deserved better. You deserved better. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just want you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. You were right about me. I destroyed everything good in my life because I was too weak to be better. Be happy. That's all I want now. Just be happy. Caleb." Evelyn read it twice, then handed it to Silas. He read it in silence, then gave it back. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think he was a broken man who realized too late what he'd lost." Silas looked at her carefully. "But that doesn't erase what he did to you." "No, it doesn't." Evelyn stood up and walked to the fire pit where someone had been burning scrap wood. She dropped the letter in and watched it burn. "I forgive you," she said quietly, speaking to the flames, to the memory of her father, to the ghost of everything he'd been. "Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry you with me anymore." The words felt like releasing something heavy she'd been holding on to for years. When the letter was nothing but ash, Evelyn turned back to Silas. "Let's go build a barn," she said. By sunset, the barn was finished. It wasn't fancy, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was solid and weatherproof and would keep the animals safe through winter. Everyone stood back to admire their work, tired and proud. "To the Boones!" someone shouted, raising a flask. "To the Boones!" the crowd echoed. Evelyn stood with Silas and the children looking at what they'd all built together. At the barn, yes, but also at the community that had formed around them, at the life they were creating from the ashes of tragedy and violence. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and solid and worth fighting for. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on a bright January morning that was so cold it hurt to breathe. The whole town came. Even some of the people who judged Evelyn harshly showed up, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of genuine goodwill. Constance Blackwood didn't come, but her absence felt like a gift. Evelyn wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Yates had helped her make. Silas wore his best suit, freshly pressed. The children stood beside them, Wyatt looking proud and nervous, Noah grinning, Lila in a new dress that she wouldn't stop twirling in. The ceremony was short and simple. No fancy words, no elaborate promises, just two people who'd survived hell choosing to build something better together. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Silas kissed her like she was something precious. The crowd cheered, the children applauded, and Evelyn felt for the first time in her life like she belonged somewhere. The reception was held in the new barn, which someone had decorated with pine branches and ribbons. There was food and music and dancing. Evelyn danced with Silas, then with Wyatt, then with every man who asked. Around midnight, when most people had gone home, she found herself on the porch with Silas, watching the stars. "We did it," she said softly. "We did." Silas pulled her close. "You're officially stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates." "Can you?" "Maybe one or two." She smiled. "But this one's not so bad." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Silas said, "I have something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a locket on a delicate chain. "It was Catherine's," he said quietly. "I want you to have it." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Silas, I can't." "Yes, you can. She would have wanted you to have it." He opened the locket, showing her the pictures inside. Silas and Catherine on their wedding day, young and smiling. "I'm not trying to replace her, but I want you to know that you're not replacing her either. You're just you. And that's more than enough." Evelyn let him put the locket around her neck. The weight of it felt right, like a bridge between past and future. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me a choice. For seeing me as a person when everyone else saw property. For loving me when I didn't know how to love myself." "You always knew," Silas said. "You just needed someone to show you it was safe." They went inside together, to the house that was now officially theirs. The children were already asleep, exhausted from the excitement. Silas and Evelyn walked through the quiet rooms, checking on each one. "They're good kids," Evelyn said, watching Noah sleep with his arms wrapped around a stuffed bear. "They are. Because of you. Because of us." Later, lying in bed with Silas's arm around her, Evelyn thought about everything that had happened, the violence and fear, the grief and struggle, the slow, painful process of learning to trust again. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been smooth. There had been setbacks and fights and moments when she'd wanted to give up. But she hadn't. She'd kept going. And now she had this, a husband who loved her, children who needed her, a home that was truly hers. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked sleepily. "How far I've come. How far we've all come. Proud of yourself? Maybe a little. Good. You should be." He kissed her forehead. "You're worth more than all the land in Wyoming, more than every herd of cattle, more than gold." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. Worth more than gold. She'd spent so much of her life believing she was worthless that her only value came from what she could do for other people. But Silas saw something different. He saw her. And maybe that was what love really was. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but someone choosing to see you, really see you, and deciding you were worth the effort anyway. Spring came slowly, melting the snow 1 inch at a time. The ranch came back to life, grass growing, flowers blooming, animals giving birth to new generations. Evelyn worked alongside Silas and the children, building something that would last. She never saw her father's grave, didn't feel the need to. He was gone, and she'd made her peace with that. One afternoon in late March, she was in the garden planting vegetables when Lila came running up. Evelyn, come quick." "What's wrong?" Nothing's wrong. Come see. Evelyn followed the excited child to the barn, where Silas and the boys were gathered around one of the stalls. Inside, the mare they'd saved from the fire stood with a newborn foal, still wet and wobbly. She had her baby, Lila said proudly, like she'd personally delivered it. Evelyn watched the foal struggle to its feet, watched the mother nuzzle it gently. New life. A new beginning. What should we name it? Noah asked. That's up to Evelyn, Silas said, smiling at her. She's the one who saved its mama. Evelyn thought for a moment. Hope, she said finally. Let's call her Hope, because that's what this was. What all of this was. Hope that the future could be better than the past. Hope that broken things could be mended. Hope that sometimes, despite everything, people got the happy endings they deserved. That night, standing on the porch with Silas while the children played in the yard, Evelyn looked out at the ranch, at the rebuilt barn and the green fields and the mountains in the distance, and felt something settle in her chest. This was home. These were her people. This was the life she'd chosen, and it had chosen her right back. What are you smiling about? Silas asked. Just thinking about how different things are now. A year ago, I was being sold in a general store. Today, I'm standing here with you, watching our children play, planning our future. Regret anything? Not a single thing. She looked at him, this man who'd saved her by giving her the power to save herself. Do you? Only that I didn't find you sooner. He kissed her, sweet and slow, and somewhere in the yard Lila made gagging noises while the boys laughed. They were a family, imperfect, complicated, held together by choice rather than blood, but real, solid, built on a foundation of mutual respect and hard-won trust. Evelyn Hart. Boone had learned something important in the years since she'd left her father's house. She'd learned that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about choosing, every single day, to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing that you deserved better. She'd also learned that love wasn't something you could buy or trade or own. It was something you built, piece by piece, through actions and choices and showing up even when it was hard. And she'd learned, most importantly, that her worth had never been determined by what her father said or what the town thought or what anyone else believed about her. Her worth came from within, from her strength, her courage, her refusal to be broken no matter how many times the world tried to break her. The girl who'd been traded for flour had become the woman who'd saved lives in a blizzard, who'd stood up to bullies and abusers, who'd rebuilt a ranch and a family from the ground up. She was Evelyn Boone now, wife, mother, partner, survivor, and no one would ever make her kneel again. Years later, when people told stories about the early days of Dry Creek, they'd talk about the girl who was sold in the general store and the rancher who stopped it. They'd talk about the barn raising and the wedding and all the small moments that had seemed ordinary at the time, but added up to something extraordinary. But the real story, the one that mattered, was simpler than all that. It was about a young woman who'd been told her entire life that she was worthless, who'd been beaten down and sold and treated like property, and how she'd decided, against all odds, that they were wrong. It was about choosing yourself when no one else would. About building a life worth living even when the world tried to take it away from you. About love that wasn't perfect but was real, and family that wasn't blood but was home. It was about survival, about hope, about the strength it takes to believe you deserve better and then fight like hell to get it. And in the end, standing on that porch with the man she loved and the children she'd chosen and the life she'd built with her own 2 hands, Evelyn understood the truth she'd been searching for all along. She was worth more than flour, more than land, more than gold. She was worth everything, and she'd never, ever forget it again.